Hey guys, tonight we're going to pull back the silken curtains of a thousand-year-old court. A world where poetry was currency and ink was power, a place where whispers carried more weight than swords. You're about to step into the quiet, candlelit chambers of an ancient Japanese aristocracy, where the air hangs heavy with the scent of incense and the rustle of elaborate kimonos. We'll be tiptoeing through the Heian period, a time of exquisite beauty and suffocating formality. And believe me, trying to stay awake through its intricacies might just be your biggest challenge yet. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling chatty, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in late 10th century Heiankyo, modern-day Kyoto, a city laid out like a giant chessboard, meticulously planned and utterly, almost suffocatingly, elegant. It's a world where the highest echelons of society lived lives of prescribed beauty. It's obsessed with aesthetics, poetry, and calligraphy. Imagine a society where your worth was measured not by your bank account, but by the subtle curve of your handwriting or the perfect selection of a seasonal flower for a poem. This is the world into which our protagonist, Lady Murasaki Shikibu, was born around the year 973 or 978 CE. Her given name isn't actually Murasaki, that's a nickname. A literary nod to a prominent character in her greatest work, which we'll get to, of course. Her actual personal name is lost to history, swallowed by time, like so many delicate blossoms from that era. We know her as Murasaki Shikibu, Shikibu referring to her father's position in the Bureau of Ceremonial. It's a bit like calling someone Ms. Treasury Department today, which, let's be honest, sounds far less glamorous. Her family, the Fujiwara clan, was incredibly powerful, practically running the country from behind the imperial throne. But don't picture them as the uber-rich private jet to everywhere kind of powerful. They were more like the ancient equivalent of old money, with a long lineage of scholars and poets.
Ow.
Though by Murasaki's time, her specific branch of the Fujiwara wasn't quite at the very pinnacle of political power. They were what you might call comfortably aristocratic, not filthy rich. Her great-grandfather, Fujiwara no Kainsuke, was a renowned poet, and her father, Fujiwara no Tamatoki, was also a scholar and a provincial governor. He's a man of letters who probably spent more time composing verses than managing rice paddies. This intellectual heritage, this deep-seated love for language and literature, flowed in her veins. Like a perfectly brewed cup of green tea on a quiet afternoon, life for a girl of her standing in Heian, Japan was, by our standards, incredibly restrictive. You weren't exactly encouraged to run around freely kicking a ball or building a fort. Your world was often confined to the family compound, behind high walls and sliding screens. Education for girls was primarily focused on domestic skills, proper court etiquette, and perhaps enough calligraphy to write a graceful love poem when the time came. But Murasaki was different. She had an insatiable curiosity, a mind that devoured knowledge, much to the quiet astonishment, and perhaps a touch of concern of her family. Think of it like a quiet revolution happening right there in her own sitting room. Historians still argue whether her intellectual prowess was a rare anomaly, or if other aristocratic women simply didn't have the opportunity, or perhaps the audacity, to express it so openly. What we do know is that she was already showing signs of a formidable intellect, sharpness that would soon set her apart in a world designed to keep women, especially in their place. You can almost feel the gentle hum of her mind, buzzing, with questions and observations, even as the world around her moved at a much slower, more deliberate pace. You're still nestled in that quiet Heiankyo compound, perhaps imagining the gentle rustle of silk as a young Murasaki, barely more than a child, ducks away from her formal lessons, while her younger brother Nobunora was being schooled in Chinese. Classics, the very bedrock of intellectual life for aristocratic men, Murasaki, for sheer determination and a quick mind, was eavesdropping. And not just eavesdropping on playground gossip, mind you. She was absorbing the intricacies of classical Chinese literature, something utterly unheard of for a girl at that time. Imagine her perhaps peeking around a screen, listening intently as her brother's tutor droned on about Confucius or the great poets of the Tang dynasty. It's like being in grade school today and secretly acing quantum physics while your classmates are still struggling with long division. Her father, Fujiwara no Tamutoki, a man who clearly valued intellect above strict gender roles, noticed her astonishing aptitude. He reportedly lamented, "If only you were a boy, how proud I would be." It's a bittersweet compliment, isn't it? On one hand, recognition of her brilliance. On the other, a stark reminder of the societal cage she was born into. But despite this lament, he didn't exactly forbid her. In fact, he indulged her. He taught her Chinese characters, shared his own scholarly insights, and encouraged her voracious reading. This was a radical act for the time, quiet rebellion against the established norms, where a woman's literary pursuits were generally confined to native Japanese poetry, waka, and the delicate art of prose in the vernacular. She was essentially getting a forbidden education, learning the secret code of the male intellectual elite. Now, this wasn't like sneaking off to a secret library filled with forbidden tomes. Her access came through her familial environment. Her father, a provincial governor who moved between the capital and various provinces, often brought texts home. You can picture her, perhaps late at night, a flickering oil lamp her only companion, poring over scrolls that would have been deemed too heavy for a woman. Historians still argue whether her father's encouragement is a calculated move to refine her mind for a better marriage match, or a genuine recognition of her unique genius. It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? Is he an enlightened feminist? Ahead of his time? Or just a pragmatic parent? Probably a bit of both, knowing human nature. This immersion in both classical Chinese and native Japanese literature gave her an unparalleled breadth of knowledge. She was not only skilled in waka, the 31-syllable poems that were the social currency of the Heian court, but she also understood the deeper philosophical and historical contexts derived from Chinese texts. This unique blend would become the fertile ground from which her future masterpiece would blossom. It's like being fluent in both Shakespearean English and modern slang. You can appreciate the classics and still talk to your mates at the pub. This period of her life was one of quiet intellectual growth, a time when she was absorbing the world around her, filing away observations about the intricate court rituals, the subtle power dynamics, and the delicate dance of human emotions that unfolded within those gilded walls. She was a keen observer, a quiet sponge, soaking up every detail of the Heian aristocratic life, from the elaborate layering of kimonos to the fleeting expressions on a lady's face during a poetry contest. This period of intense, self-directed learning, often in solitude, was crucial. It forged the mind that would later create a universe of characters, each exquisitely detailed, each grappling with the same universal human experiences, albeit in a very different, very ancient setting. You can almost hear the soft scratching of her brush or the turning of a scroll. As she meticulously built her internal library of knowledge, with her mind brimming with forbidden knowledge and a quiet observational prowess, you now witness Murasaki transitioning from a keen student to a young woman navigating the expected path for an aristocrat around the turn of the 11th century. In her early 20s, she entered into a marriage. Not exactly a love match by our modern rom-com standards, but a customary arrangement in Heian society. Her husband was Fujiwara no Nobutaka, a considerably older man, a distant cousin, and critically, a member of the same influential Fujiwara clan. He was a poet and a scholar himself, which perhaps offered some intellectual common ground, a shared appreciation for the delicate artistry of waka, or the weight of a well-turned phrase. You can imagine the conversations over evening tea, less about honey, how was your day at the rice fields, and more about, did you catch that terribly witty poem from Lord So-and-so? This marriage, while seemingly conventional, was a pivotal moment. It thrust her more directly into the social tapestry of the Heian court, even if indirectly through her husband's connections. Historians still argue whether this marriage was a genuine partnership or primarily a societal obligation. But what's clear is that it provided her with a new vantage point. She wasn't merely observing from the quiet corners of her father's estate. She was now part of a more established household, receiving visitors, managing staff, and engaging in the subtle complexities of aristocratic life from within. Like moving from watching a play from the audience to suddenly having a walk-on role, a subtle shift, but one that deepens your understanding of the backstage. Drama. The most significant outcome of this union was the birth of her daughter. Dani no Sami, around 999 CE motherhood. Even in that era of nursemaids and extensive household staff, would have been a profound experience. You can picture her, perhaps rocking her infant daughter, her mind still turning over lines of poetry or observations about human nature. This period of domesticity, brief as it was, likely deepened her understanding of family dynamics, love, loss, and the intricate bonds that tie people together, themes that would later resonate so powerfully in her writing. Think of it as collecting emotional data points for future literary use, though she certainly wouldn't have thought of it that way at the time. Sadly, this period of relative contentment was fleeting. Nobutaka passed away just a few years into their marriage, leaving Murasaki a young widow with a small child. The exact circumstances of his death are somewhat shrouded in the mists of time, but his passing plunged her into a period of deep grief and financial uncertainty. For a woman in Heian, Japan, widowhood often meant a significant loss of status and security. You weren't exactly encouraged to start a small business or open a consulting firm. Your future was intrinsically linked to your husband's family, and without him, that link could weaken considerably. It's like losing your main internet connection in a world where everything is online suddenly. You're disconnected and searching for a new signal. This loss, however devastating personally, proved to be another critical turning point for her literary development. Grief often sharpens the senses, deepens introspection, and compels one to seek solace or expression. It's during this time, burdened by sorrow and contemplating her future, that Murasaki is believed to have begun writing her monumental work. Some scholars suggest that the act of writing was a form of catharsis, a way to process her emotions and to find meaning in a world that had suddenly become much more challenging. Her husband's death forced her to look beyond the immediate comforts of her life and confront the harsh realities of existence, themes that are woven throughout the tale of Genji. It's a quirky tidbit to consider. The world's first novelist might have started writing because, well, she was having a really rough time. It's a period of quiet contemplation and introspection, born from personal loss. It was the crucible in which a literary masterpiece began to take shape. As you continue to drift through the Heian court, you now see Murasaki, a widow with a young daughter, facing a crossroads. In a society where a woman's security was often tied to a male guardian, her situation was precarious. But her intellect, her impeccable lineage, and her burgeoning literary talent were about to catch the eye of a very powerful figure, Empress Shochi. This wasn't a sudden dramatic recruitment like being scouted for a professional sports team. It was a more subtle, deliberate process, much like a carefully orchestrated game of Go. Played out with social maneuvers and artistic reputation, the Empress, the daughter of the most powerful man in Japan at the time, Fujiwara no Michinaga, was building a vibrant literary salon within her court. Michinaga, a man of immense political ambition and cultural acumen, stood the power of prestige and intellectual capital. He was essentially curating the finest minds of the age to enhance his daughter's standing, and by extension, his own. Think of it as a strategic investment in soft power. Long before anyone even coined the term, he wanted his daughter's court to be the most brilliant, the most culturally significant, and to outshine the rival Empress Tishi's salon, where the famous Sei Shonagon, author of the Pillow Book, held sway. Yes, there was a quiet, intense rivalry between these two imperial courts. A battle fought with poems and prose rather than swords, which frankly sounds far more civilized. Even if the stakes were still quite high, Murasaki's reputation as a scholar and a talented writer, especially in Chinese, would have reached their ears. Her father, Fujiwara no Tamatoki, held various government posts under Michinaga, and it's highly probable he played a role in recommending his brilliant, if somewhat unconventional daughter. It was an opportunity not just for financial stability, But for intellectual stimulation and a chance to truly exercise her extraordinary mind, for Murasaki, this was more than just a job. It was an entry into the very heart of the Heian literary world. You can imagine her apprehension, a quiet woman stepping into the glittering, often cutthroat world of the imperial court. Her appointment as a lady-in-waiting to Empress Shochi likely occurred around 1005 or 1006 CE. Her duties would have been varied, encompassing everything from assisting the empress with daily rituals, composing poetry for court events, to simply being an intellectual companion, ready to engage in witty banter or deep literary discussions. It was a position that demanded not just intelligence, but also extreme discretion and keen social awareness. You couldn't just blurt out your thoughts. Every word, every gesture was observed and interpreted. It's like being a high-level assistant who also needs to be a diplomat, a poet, and a living encyclopedia, all while maintaining perfect posture. This move to the imperial court placed her at the epicenter of Heian culture. It was a world of exquisite taste, intricate ceremonies, and intense aesthetic appreciation. Yet beneath the veneer of beauty, there were always power struggles, rivalries, and the quiet anxieties of court life. This unique vantage point provided Murasaki with an unparalleled opportunity to observe the inner workings of the highest echelons of society, the political machinations, the personal relationships, the triumphs, and the heartbreaks. She saw it all, and she absorbed it all. Historians still argue whether her time in court was one of quiet contentment or constant underlying tension. Given the intense social dynamics, what is certain is that every interaction, every observation, every overheard whisper would become invaluable material for the grand narrative she was weaving, even as she performed her daily duties. You're now fully immersed in the glittering, gossipy, intensely competitive world of Empress Shoshi's salon, where Lady Murasaki, the quiet scholar, has taken up her post. Imagine this. It's not just a physical space, but a vibrant intellectual hub, a gathering of the finest minds and most accomplished artists of the Heian court. Think of it less like a modern office and more like an exclusive, ongoing literary party where everyone is trying to outcompose each other with their latest poem or outcharm with their elegant prose. Empress Shoji, a young woman herself, was intelligent and cultured, actively encouraging the literary pursuits of her ladies-in-waiting. Her salon was a deliberate counterpoint to that of her rival Empress Teishi, who famously hosted Sei Shonagon. While Teishi's court was known for its playful wit and sharp observations, as exemplified by the Pillow Book, Shoshi's salon, influenced by her powerful father Michinaga, cultivated a more refined, scholarly, and perhaps a touch more serious literary atmosphere. It's like the difference between a spontaneous jam session and a meticulously rehearsed classical concert. Both beautiful, but with different vibes. Murasaki, with her deep knowledge of both Japanese and Chinese classics, would have been a prized asset. Her duties were varied and demanding. She would compose poetry for formal occasions, assist the empress with correspondence which often took the form of elegantly phrased poems, participate in the daily rounds of witty exchanges, and literary games. Picture a scene where a new moon inspires an impromptu poetry contest, and everyone, from the empress down, scrambles to compose the most poignant or clever waka. The social stakes were incredibly high. A poorly phrased poem could subtly diminish one standing, while a brilliant verse could elevate it. It's a bit like a medieval social media platform, where your reputation hinged on your ability to go viral with a 31-syllable tweet. Beyond the formal duties, the salon was a space for genuine intellectual discourse. Ladies would discuss historical events, Buddhist philosophy, and of course, literature. Murasaki, initially perhaps a quiet observer, would have gradually found her voice within this circle. She witnessed firsthand the intricate dance of courtly love, subtle power plays, the endless pursuit of aesthetic perfection, and the underlying melancholy that often permeated the lives of these cloistered aristocrats. These were the real life inspirations for the characters and conflicts she was beginning to explore in her burgeoning narrative. One quirky tidbit from this period is the very act of writing itself. There was no instant messaging or word processing. Writing meant grinding. Ink sticks, carefully preparing paper or silk scrolls, and meticulously brushing each character. The process was slow, deliberate, and imbued with a sense of ceremony. Imagine the effort involved in just writing a single letter, let alone a multi-volume novel. The slow pace, however, also allowed for deep reflection and meticulous crafting of prose. Historians still argue whether the intense intellectual atmosphere of the Salon was primarily a source of inspiration or also a source of pressure for Murasaki, given the subtle rivalries. It was likely both. This environment, with its blend of high culture, social intrigue, and the ever-present demand for artistic excellence, became the crucible in which the tale of Genji was not just conceived, but actively shaped by the daily observations of a true literary genius. As you settle deeper into the serene, yet subtly charged, atmosphere of Empress Shozi's salon, you begin to perceive the intricate web of relationships and the polite, yet palpable, literary rivalries that defined court life. It wasn't enough to simply be present. One had to actively engage, to shine, and perhaps most importantly, to subtly outmaneuver one's peers. Imagine a very polite, very artistic version of a reality TV show, where the contestants are ladies-in-waiting vying for poetic supremacy. Murasaki, despite her quiet demeanor and deep scholarly bent, was not immune to these undercurrents. She was, after all, operating in the shadow of Sei Shonagon, the celebrated author of the Pillow Book, who resided in the rival court of Empress Teishi. Sei Shonagon was known for her sharp wit, her keen observations, and her ability to capture the fleeting moments of court life with a sparkling, often satirical pen. Her writing was vibrant, personal, and famously insightful, almost like a 10th century influencer's daily diary, but with far more literary merit. The rivalry between the two empresses, and by extension their literary ladies, was not openly hostile. It was more a battle of prestige, quiet competition to see which court could attract the most brilliant minds and produce the most exquisite art. For Murasaki, this meant her work, and indeed her presence, would inevitably be compared to Sei Shonagon's. Historians still argue whether Murasaki harbored a genuine dislike for Sei Shonagon or merely viewed her as a formidable professional rival. Her own diary, Murasaki Shikibu Nikki, contains passages where she criticizes Sei Shonagon's writing style as being too fluffy or pompous, and even her character as being conceited. It's a fascinating peek into the mind of a genius, revealing that even literary titans had their petty moments, much like today's authors, subtweeting each other. This unspoken competition, however, likely served as a powerful motivator for Murasaki. While Sei Shonagon documented the here and now of court life with dazzling immediacy, Murasaki was aiming for something far grander, a sweeping narrative that explored the depths of human emotion, the complexities of relationships, and the inexorable passage of time. She wasn't just writing observations, she was building an entire universe. It's like the difference between a brilliant photographer capturing a moment and a visionary film, a director crafting an epic saga. The environment of the salon, while intellectually stimulating, also presented unique challenges for Murasaki. She was highly educated in Chinese, a masculine domain. And there were whispers, and even accusations that she was too learned. Some ladies, perhaps feeling intimidated or simply adhering to societal norms, might have viewed her scholarly prowess as unladylike. There's a quirky tidbit here. Murasaki herself recounts an anecdote in her diary where she had to pretend she didn't understand Chinese characters to avoid making others feel uncomfortable. Imagine pretending to be less smart than you are, just to fit in. This pressure to conform, even while breaking new ground, highlights the delicate tightrope she walked. Despite these subtle pressures and rivalries, or perhaps because of them, Murasaki's creative furnace was stoked. The constant flow of information, the daily dramas, the beauty of the court, and the underlying tensions all fed into the work she was slowly and meticulously crafting. She was observing human nature, at its most refined, and also at its most vulnerable, experiences that would soon be immortalized in ink. With the subtle hum of courtly rivalries and the refined discussions of the salon as your backdrop, you now approach the moment when Murasaki's quiet dedication began to coalesce into something truly groundbreaking, the very genesis of the tale of Genji. It wasn't a sudden flash of inspiration, like a bolt of lightning, but rather a slow, deliberate bloom, cultivated from years of observation, scholarship, and personal experience. Historians still argue whether she started writing Genji before or after entering Empress Shoshi's service. But the prevailing theory is that the initial sparks were struck during her widowhood, a period of introspection and quiet contemplation, perhaps as a way to cope with her grief, or simply to give form to the myriad thoughts swirling in her brilliant mind. She began to put pen to paper. Imagine her in a dimly lit room, perhaps late at night, the only sounds the rustle of her silk sleeves and the scratching of her brush on carefully prepared paper. This was not a public act. It was deeply personal. It's almost clandestine. The initial impulse for Genji is believed to have come from a desire to create a story that captured the essence of Heian aristocratic life, but with a depth and psychological realism rarely seen before. Existing tales and romances of the time were often episodic, focusing on single events or adventures. Murasaki, however, envisioned something far more ambitious, a sprawling narrative that would follow characters through their entire lives, exploring their relationships, their inner thoughts, and the consequences of their actions over decades. She wanted to paint a comprehensive portrait of a society, not just a fleeting glimpse. It's like moving from painting a single still life to orchestrating an entire opera with a full cast and orchestra. The very concept of a novel, as we understand it today, along its complex prose narrative, focusing on character development and societal commentary, simply didn't exist in the 11th century. Murasaki was inventing it as she went along. She drew inspiration from various sources, traditional Japanese tales, Chinese historical narratives, and even Buddhist scriptures, weaving them into a tapestry that was uniquely her own. Her Chinese classical education, once deemed unladylike, proved invaluable, providing her with models of sophisticated storytelling and character portrayal. The mainstream historical fact here is that the tale of Genji is widely considered the world's first novel. It isn't just a quirky tidbit for trivia night. It's a monumental achievement that fundamentally reshaped literary history. Think about that for a moment. One woman, working in relative obscurity, created a literary form that would eventually dominate global literature. Her initial writings were likely circulated in manuscript form amongst close friends and family, perhaps even within the Empress's salon, gathering feedback and generating buzz. The earliest sections of Genji might have been short stories or extended poems that she gradually connected and expanded upon. This organic growth, chapter by chapter, meant the story wasn't fully planned out from the beginning. It evolved as she wrote, characters deepening, plot lines intertwining, much like a complex vine slowly growing to cover an entire wall. This slow, deliberate unfolding added to its natural feel, almost as if you're watching life itself unfold. You can picture the excitement of the ladies in waiting. It's eager for the next installment, much like waiting for your favorite Netflix series to drop. As the first chapters of the tale of Genji began to take shape, you can almost feel Murasaki withdrawing into herself, channeling her observations and intellect into the intricate world she was bringing to life. This was not a public act of creation, like a painter at an easel in a busy market. Instead, imagine her in a quiet chamber, perhaps overlooking a tranquil garden, her mind ablaze with the lives of her characters. This was the solitary, often arduous, process of composing the world's first novel. For Murasaki, writing meant a meticulous, time-consuming endeavor. There were no fountain pens, no mass-produced paper. Each word was painstakingly brushed onto delicate paper or silk scrolls, using ink that had to be freshly ground from an ink stick. Imagine the sensory experience, the subtle scent of the ink, the whisper of the brush against the surface, the focused quiet broken only by the chirping of cicadas outside or the distant rustle of a courtier's robes. This slow, deliberate pace of writing allowed for deep contemplation. for each sentence to be carefully weighed and perfected before it became a permanent part of the narrative. It's like composing a symphony note by note rather than quickly. Sketching a pop song, she worked mostly in private, often at night, by the flickering light of an oil lamp or a candle. This wasn't just a matter of preference. It was also a societal expectation. While women were encouraged to write poetry and diaries, embarking on a sprawling narrative like Genji was an unprecedented undertaking. It required a level of sustained focus and creative immersion that would have been difficult to achieve amidst the constant demands and social obligations of court life or a bustling household. Her quiet dedication meant sacrificing social engagements, or perhaps transforming them into observational exercises for her ongoing work. This private world of creation was her sanctuary, a place where her imagination could truly soar beyond the confines of Heian etiquette. 1. Quirky tidbit about this process is the revisions or lack thereof in our modern sense. Unlike today, where you can hit delete and instantly rework a paragraph. Corrections on a scroll meant either carefully pasting over errors or, more often, simply starting a new section. This meant an incredible pressure to get it right the first time, to carefully pre-compose sentences in her mind before committing them to the page. It's like writing a novel on a typewriter, but if every typo meant retyping an entire page. Historians still argue about the extent to which Murasaki planned out the complex plot lines and character arcs of Genji in advance versus allowing them to organically unfold during the writing process. Given its immense scope, it was likely a combination of meticulous planning for major events and fluid improvisation for the day-to-day interactions. The narrative grew in chapters, each one a self-contained unit that could be read aloud or circulated independently. This modular structure meant that the story could evolve and Murasaki could incorporate new ideas, observations, or even criticisms from her early readers. She was essentially releasing her novel in serialized form long before the Victorian era popularized the concept, as she wrote The World of Prince Genji, the Shining Prince, and the countless characters who populated his life became more real than the world outside her window.
Ouch.
She was a creator, meticulously crafting every detail, from the exquisite descriptions of courtly attire to the subtle nuances of emotional distress. This was the silent, profound labor that brought a new literary form into being. You're now about to witness a quiet revolution as the first completed sections of the tale of Genji began to circulate within the tightly knit, influential circles of the Heian court. This wasn't a book launch with flashing cameras and celebrity endorsements. Instead, imagine it as a hushed, eagerly anticipated sharing of precious, handwritten scrolls. The reception was immediate and overwhelmingly positive, a testament to Murasaki's unparalleled skill, as Murasaki completed sections or even individual chapters. They would be meticulously copied by scribes, not for mass distribution, but for a select few. Primary audience initially was Empress Shoji herself and the ladies of her salon. Can you picture the scene? A group of elegantly dressed women, perhaps gathered in a sun-dappled room, listening intently as a lady-in-waiting. Or perhaps Murasaki herself read aloud the latest adventures and romantic entanglements of Prince Genji. The air would have been thick with anticipation, gasps, and whispers. It's like waiting for the next episode of your favorite prestige drama. But you have to wait for someone to literally write it out by hand before you can watch. Story's immediate popularity stemmed from several factors. Firstly, the subject matter itself was utterly captivating. The tale of Genji offered an intimate, detailed, and often scandalous portrayal of courtly life. Featuring characters who were undeniably human, driven by love, jealousy, ambition, and sorrow, emotions that resonated deeply with the aristocratic readers, who saw reflections of their own lives within its pages. It was escapism and a mirror, all at once. Secondly, Murasaki's prose was exquisitely beautiful, rich with poetic imagery and psychological depth. Her language, while elegant, was also accessible, drawing readers into the emotional lives of her characters with unprecedented detail. The mainstream historical fact here is that the tale of Genji was an instant sensation among the Heian aristocracy. Copies were made and passed from hand to hand, generating buzz and sparking conversations throughout the court. Noblewomen and even high-ranking courtiers were captivated by the saga of Prince Genji. This widespread informal circulation was akin to today's viral content, spreading through word of mouth, and the sheer force of its compelling narrative. One quirky tidbit about this early reception: it's believed that the very nickname Murasaki, meaning purple, was given to her by Emperor Shoji or Michinaga himself, inspired by the character Murasaki no Yu, Prince Genji's beloved consort. This speaks volumes about how deeply the characters permeated the consciousness of the court. Imagine if everyone started calling J.K. Rowling Hermione because of her character. It shows the profound impact her creation had on the people around her. However, not all reception was uncritical. Historians still argue whether the initial popularity also brought a degree of subtle jealousy or criticism from other writers who might have felt overshadowed by her monumental achievement. Some purists of the time might have viewed a fictional narrative, especially one of such length, as less serious than traditional poetry or historical accounts. Despite any whispers of disapproval, the overwhelming demand for new chapters pushed Murasaki to continue her monumental work, transforming it from a personal project into a cultural phenomenon that would captivate generations.
Ow.
Genji was undeniable, solidifying Murasaki's reputation as a literary force and forever changing the landscape of Japanese literature. As you continue to immerse yourself in the world of the tale of Genji, you begin to appreciate not just its immediate popularity, but its profound literary innovations. This wasn't merely a captivating story. It was a groundbreaking work that redefined the very possibilities of prose narrative. Murasaki Shikibu, with quiet brilliance, wove together themes and techniques that were centuries ahead of her time. One of the most remarkable aspects of Genji is its psychological depth. Before Murasaki, characters in Japanese literature were often archetypes or served as vessels for plot. Genji, however, and the vast cast of characters surrounding him, are depicted with incredible complexity and nuance. You delve into their inner thoughts, their conflicting emotions, their regrets, and their evolving personalities over many years. Murasaki explores the subtle interplay of human relationships, love, friendship, rivalry, sorrow, with a precision that feels startlingly modern. You don't just know what they do, you understand why they do it, often with all their messy, contradictory motivations laid bare. It's like switching from a black and white sketch to a full color. A Max movie of the human heart, another key innovation is the sense of time and consequence. The tale of Genji spans over 70 years, following Genji from his youth to his twilight years, and then continuing with his descendants. This multi-generational scope was unprecedented. Events from early in the narrative have repercussions decades later, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of cause and effect and the long shadow of the past. This gives the novel a powerful sense of realism and fate as characters grapple with the cumulative weight of their choices. It's a far cry from episodic tales where each adventure feels disconnected from the last. Murasaki also masterfully integrated poetry into prose. The characters frequently compose waka poems to express their feelings, to flirt, to mourn, or to convey subtle messages. These poems aren't just decorative, they are integrative to the plot and character development, revealing layers of emotion and communication that cannot be expressed through ordinary dialogue. This blend creates a unique literary texture, where the flow of narrative is punctuated by bursts of lyrical beauty. It's like a conversation where suddenly someone breaks into a perfectly crafted song to express what words alone cannot. The novel also grapples with profound Buddhist themes, such as the impermanence of life mujur, the suffering inherent in existence, dukkha, and the concept of karma. These philosophical underpinnings add a layer of intellectual richness, prompting readers to reflect on the deeper meanings of the characters' trials and triumphs. While seemingly a tale of aristocratic romance and intrigue, it often carries a deep, quiet melancholy, reminding you that all worldly pleasures are fleeting. One quirky tidbit about Genji's structure: the novel is divided into 54 chapters. Chapters 42 and 43 are missing, or perhaps were never written, creating a fascinating gap in the narrative. Historians still argue about the precise reasons for this omission. Was it intentional, lost to time, or simply incomplete? This mystery only adds to the allure of the text. In essence, Murasaki Shikibu didn't just tell a story. She created the entire world, populated with complex characters, driven by timeless emotions, and set against a meticulously detailed social backdrop. Her literary choices, from psychological realism to multi-generational scope, laid the foundation for the novel. As a distinct literary form, ensuring her place not just in Japanese literature, but as a foundational figure in global literary history. As you continue to immerse yourself in the world of Lady Murasaki, now a celebrated author within the court, you observe that her life as a lady-in-waiting to Empress Shochi continued its delicate dance of duties and observations. Even as her monumental work, The Tale of Genji, captivated the aristocracy. Being the author of the most talked-about narrative wasn't a ticket to complete freedom. In many ways, it deepened her immersion into the very world she was chronicling. Her daily life remained largely dictated by the routines of the imperial court. This meant attending to the empress, participating in ceremonial events, and engaging in the constant, subtle art of social interaction that defined Heian aristocracy. Imagine the sheer amount of time dedicated to proper attire, the endless layers of silk kimonos, the meticulous arrangement of one's hair, and the delicate application of cosmetics. It was a world where aesthetic perfection was paramount, and a misplaced sleeve could be as scandalous as a political gaffe. Murasaki, despite her intellectual pursuits, would have been expected to conform to these rigid standards. Embodying the elegance she so vividly described in her novel, her position also meant she was privy to the inner workings of power, albeit from a discreet distance. Empress Shoji was the daughter of Fujiwara no Michinaga, the most powerful man in Japan. This gave Murasaki a unique vantage point to observe Michinaga's political machinations. His interactions with the emperor and the subtle ways power was wielded and maintained through alliances, marriages, and strategic maneuvering. These real-life observations undoubtedly fed into the political intrigues and power struggles depicted within the tale of Genji, giving them a chilling realism. You could imagine her subtly taking mental notes, tucking away conversations and expressions for later use. Much like a modern journalist observing a political summit, the intellectual atmosphere within Empress Shoshi's salon continued to be a significant part of her life. While she was now the most famous literary figure in residence, the exchange of ideas, the poetry contests, and the discussions of Chinese classics would have persisted. This environment, while stimulating, also demanded constant vigilance. Every word she spoke, every poem she composed could be scrutinized, judged, and compared. It was a constant performance, even for a mind as brilliant as hers. Historians still argue about the precise degree of Murasaki's integration into court society. Was she fully embraced? Or did her extraordinary talent set her slightly apart, an observer more than a full participant? It's a nuanced question. Fitting for such a nuanced mind, one quirky tidbit from this period is the occasional glimpse we get of Murasaki's personality through her diary. Murasaki Shikibu Nikki. She describes herself as quite reserved and somewhat critical of others, particularly those who were less intellectually inclined or overly flirtatious. She even mentions a certain discomfort with the boisterous behavior of some of her male contemporaries. This suggests a woman who, despite her societal role, maintained a strong inner world and a discerning eye for human folly. It's a reminder that even the greatest authors are just people with their own likes, dislikes, and quiet judgments. Her time at court was a masterclass in human observation, providing her with an inexhaustible well of material for her magnum opus, which continued to unfold as the years and chapters passed. You are still walking the polished wooden floors of the Heian court, serving Lady Murasaki, who, despite her literary triumphs, was not immune to the societal expectations and subtle criticisms of her time. Imagine the pressure cooker of a court where social standing and decorum were paramount, and a woman daring to delve into a traditionally male domain like serious literature could easily become a target. The primary challenge Murasaki faced was the prevailing gender norms. While waka poetry was an acceptable, even encouraged pursuit for aristocratic women, the scale and intellectual depth of the tale of Genji pushed boundaries. It delved into philosophy, politics, and complex human psychology, subjects often reserved for male scholars. Her deep knowledge of Chinese classics, which we touched upon earlier, was particularly problematic. It was considered unfeminine and possibly even dangerous for a woman to be so learned in a language associated with government and scholarship. Think of it like being a woman in the 19th century who wants to be a brain surgeon when society expects you to be a homemaker. Murasaki herself records instances of this friction in her diary. She mentions being referred to as the Japanese chronicle Nihonji by some courtiers, sarcastic nickname implying she was too scholarly, too masculine, and perhaps too serious for a lady. She describes feeling the need to hide her knowledge of Chinese from certain individuals, particularly when Michinaga, the powerful regent, pressured her to teach the empress some Chinese characters, a task she initially resisted for fear of alienating other ladies. This constant need to navigate social expectations while pursuing her intellectual passions must have been incredibly taxing. It's a quirky tidbit, isn't it? The world's first novelist had to literally dumb herself down to avoid causing a fuss. Furthermore, being the author of a highly popular yet fictional narrative could also draw subtle criticism from those who viewed fiction as a less serious art form than poetry or official historical records. While wildly popular, Genji was still a tale, not a treatise. Some might have considered it frivolous, despite its profound themes and literary merit. This tension between popular entertainment and serious literary achievement is something historians still argue about when discussing the reception of Genji among contemporary scholars versus the general court. Was it truly respected or merely enjoyed? The very content of Genji itself, with its exploration of courtly love, illicit affairs, and the complexities of human desire, could also invite censure from more conservative elements. While Mono no aware, the poignant awareness of the impermanence of things is a core theme, the narrative doesn't shy away from depicting the moral ambiguities of its characters. This might have made some members of the court uncomfortable, seeing it as too revealing or even scandalous, especially when read by impressionable young women. It's like a television show today, pushes the boundaries of what's considered acceptable for primetime viewing. Despite these challenges and the subtle pressures to conform, Murasaki persevered. Her quiet determination, coupled with the unwavering support of Empress Shoji and Michinaga, who clearly recognized the prestige Genji brought to his daughter's court, allowed her to continue her work. Her ability to navigate these societal constraints while producing a work of such unparalleled genius is a testament not only to her literary prowess, but also to her remarkable resilience and quiet strength. As you gently drift through the final chapters of Murasaki's incredible life, you begin to see the sunset of her years, marked by both the quiet continuation of her duties and the growing legacy of her unparalleled literary creation. The exact details of her later life are like much of her personal story, somewhat obscured by the mists of time. Leaving historians to piece together fragments and make educated guesses, Murasaki continued to serve Empress Shoshi, likely until the Empress effectively retired from court life, or perhaps until Murasaki herself withdrew due to age or ill health. The years would have brought changes to the court, new faces arriving, older ones fading away, and the subtle shifts in political power. While the tale of Genji was largely complete by the early 1010s, its influence continued to grow. The scribes would have been constantly at work, meticulously copying the voluminous manuscript, spreading its narrative to new readers who yearned for the next installment of Genji's complex world. This ongoing copying and circulation was the ancient world's equivalent of a book being reprinted and gaining new readers over decades. Her later years were likely spent in a more reflective state, perhaps still observing, still composing poetry, but with less of the intense creative pressure of her earlier years. We know her daughter, Daini no Sanmei, also became a prominent court poet, indicating that the literary talents of the family continued. Imagine Murasaki, a quiet matriarch, watching her daughter follow in her footsteps, perhaps offering gentle guidance, or simply enjoying the shared love for language. It's a bittersweet thought, seeing your own passion bloom in the next generation. The precise date of Murasaki Shikibu's death is unknown. Scholars generally place it somewhere between 1014 and 1030 CE, with 1014 often cited as a likely year, though evidence is scarce. This uncertainty is a common thread for many historical figures of her era, whose personal details were not meticulously recorded in the way we might expect today. She simply fades from the historical record, leaving behind a monumental legacy. That far outshone the brevity of her recorded life. One of the fascinating aspects of her legacy is how quickly the tale of Genji transcended mere popularity to become a cornerstone of Japanese culture. It wasn't just read. It was studied, alluded to in poetry, and inspired countless works of art, from illustrated scrolls to decorative screens. The characters became archetypes, their dilemmas universal, their world a beloved landscape in the Japanese imagination. This immediate and profound cultural penetration is a mainstream historical fact that highlights the sheer power of her storytelling. A quirky tidbit that demonstrates its enduring influence. Even in the Edo period centuries later, people would hold Genji appreciation societies where they would gather to read, discuss, and interpret the novel's nuances. It was, and still is, a cultural touchstone. Historians still argue about the philosophical implications of Genji's ending, particularly the final chapters known as the Yuji chapters, which are notably darker and more somber than the main narrative focusing on Genji. Was it a deliberate shift in tone by Murasaki, or perhaps even written by a different hand? The debate adds another layer of intrigue to her already enigmatic masterpiece. Regardless of these lingering questions, Murasaki's quiet departure from the world marked the end of a singular life, but the beginning of an immortal literary journey. You're now looking back from the present day, contemplating the astonishing reach and enduring impact of the tale of Genji, a work that blossomed from the quiet observations of Lady Murasaki over 1,000 years ago. This wasn't just a popular book, it was a literary earthquake that reshaped the entire landscape of Japanese culture and continues to ripple through time. It's influencing artists and writers across the globe. Its primary influence was on the very definition of narrative in Japan. Before Genji, most extended prose works were historical accounts, religious texts, or simple folktales. Murasaki's novel introduced the concept of a sustained, complex narrative with psychological depth, intricate plot lines, and evolving characters. This single work essentially created the blueprint for the Japanese novel, inspiring generations of writers who followed. Think of it as the original blueprint for every skyscraper that came after it. A foundational design that continues to inspire innovation. The themes explored in Genji became deeply ingrained in Japanese aesthetics and philosophy. The concept of mono no aware, the poignant awareness of the impermanence of beauty and life, which pervades the novel, became a central tenet of Japanese sensibility. The courtly ideals, the elegant sorrow, the emphasis on natural beauty and fleeting moments, all these elements, exquisitely rendered by Murasaki, shaped the cultural lens through which much of subsequent Japanese art and literature would be viewed. It's like a timeless fashion trend that never truly goes out of style, always subtly influencing what comes next. The tale of Genji wasn't just read. It became a wellspring for other art forms. Countless illustrated scrolls emaki were created, depicting scenes from the novel with breathtaking artistry, some dating back to Murasaki's own era. Later, it inspired no and kabuki plays, woodblock prints, ukiyo-e, poetry cycles, and even modern manga and anime. The characters of Genji Murasaki no Yu and the various princes and ladies became iconic figures, instantly recognizable and deeply cherished within Japanese culture. It's a mainstream historical fact that Genji is perhaps the single most referenced work in Japanese art history, acting as a constant muse. Even today, you can find its echoes. Modern Japanese authors still engage with its themes and characters, often reinterpreting them for contemporary audiences. The story has been translated into numerous languages, introducing Murasaki's genius to readers worldwide and solidifying its place in the global literary canon. It's a reminder that truly great storytelling transcends cultural and temporal boundaries. Quirky tidbit that underlines its impact: Genji is sometimes referred to as the Bible of Japan due to its pervasive cultural influence, not in a religious sense, but in its foundational role in shaping national identity and artistic expression. Historians still argue about the true extent of Murasaki's personal knowledge of court life versus her imaginative embellishments. How much was direct observation, and how much was pure creative genius? This debate highlights the novel's incredible blend of realism and artistry. The tale of Genji stands as a towering achievement, testament to the power of a single voice to define an entire literary tradition and capture the timeless essence of the human experience. You've traveled through 1,000 years, journeying from the quiet elegance of the Heian court to the global impact of a singular literary mind. Now, in this final stretch of our journey, you come to appreciate Lady Murasaki Shikibu's truly unique and unassailable place in history. She wasn't just a talented writer. She was a pioneering innovator, a quiet revolutionary who, without fanfare or boast, redefined what literature could be. Her singular position as the world's first novelist is not merely a historical footnote. It's a testament to her vision and her profound understanding of the human condition. In an era where women were largely confined to domestic roles or poetic ephemera, she conceived and executed a work of sprawling complexity, psychological depth, and enduring thematic resonance. She didn't just break the mold. She invented the mold itself, building an entirely new literary form from the ground up, one meticulously brushed character at a time. Imagine setting out to invent the internet entirely by yourself, using only quill and parchment. Her achievement is truly of that magnitude. She stands as a beacon for quiet genius, for the power of observation, and for the profound impact the individual can have by simply pursuing their passion with unwavering dedication. Murasaki was not a warrior, a ruler, or a public orator. Her power lay in her pen, in her ability to weave words into worlds, to transform fleeting human experiences into timeless narratives. Her life, though often constrained by societal norms and personal sorrows, was ultimately one of immense creative fulfillment. She saw the world with a discerning eye, and she captured its essence with an unparalleled artistic hand. Her legacy extends far beyond the borders of Japan. The tale of Genji has been translated and studied across the globe. Murasaki Shikibu has taken her rightful place among the pantheon of literary giants. She is celebrated not just for her historical priority, but for the sheer quality of her writing, her sophisticated narrative techniques, and her deep empathy for her characters. She resonates with readers because, despite the opulent Heian setting and the ancient customs, the emotions, desires, and struggles of her characters are profoundly universal. Love, loss, ambition, regret, the search for meaning, these are the threads that connect us across millennia. A quirky tidbit that solidifies her iconic status. Murasaki Shikibu has been featured on Japanese currency, the 2,000 yen note, a rare honor usually reserved for major political or scientific figures. This showcases just how deeply ingrained she is in the national consciousness. Historians still argue whether Murasaki understood the full scope of the literary revolution she was unleashing, or if she was simply following an irresistible creative urge. Perhaps it was a combination, a quiet confidence in her unique vision that blossomed into a world-changing masterpiece. Her quiet brilliance echoes through the ages, a gentle reminder that the most profound changes often begin with a single, meticulously crafted word. Now, as the long journey through Murasaki's world comes to a soft close, allow yourself to drift. The intricate details of the Heian court, the rustle of silk, the faint scent of incense, the whispers of poetry, let them recede into the gentle quiet. The story is complete, the pen has been laid down, and the characters of 1,000 years ago are now nestled safely within your dreams. Feel the lingering sense of beauty, the echo of human connection, and the quiet satisfaction of a tale well told. As the light fades and the world outside softens, let your mind settle into the peaceful rhythm of sleep, carrying with you the quiet power of a woman who wrote the very first novel and changed literature forever. Sweet dreams.